Good evening. I've got another fireside fairy tale for you. Last time I read you a Cinderella story that was from ancient China. And this time I'm going to be reading you a Cinderella story that comes from Renaissance Italy. This one predates the story of Cinderella that most people are familiar with, which was written by Charles Perrault during the French Enlightenment. This one is a little bit older and a little bit wilder, and I think a little bit funnier. And I read it to a bunch of little girls who were running around here just an hour or two ago. The spring break has just started here, so not so long ago I had a bunch of girls running around this backyard going pretty crazy and eating more marshmallows than is probably good for them, but that's all right. I did make sure that they saved one for me. I'm going to try not to burn it as usual. So we'll get that roasting. And this story was written by Giambattista Basile, who was an Italian, but he had kind of more of a common touch than a lot of people who ended up writing for the great courts of Europe. He was very big on his local dialect, and he actually has a very interesting history that I don't have time to get into here, but if you're interested in learning more about him, I really recommend it. So this is the story of Cenerentola, which is just the Italian way of saying Cinderella or Ash Girl. And I've always been very fond of Cinderella stories. I think they're so interesting. Some people write them off as just being about a girl who wants a nice dress and a cool boyfriend and not to have to work anymore. But that's not really what Cinderella stories are about. What they're really more about is that you have usually a young woman, although sometimes there's someone who fits a Cinderella story pattern who's a boy or a young man. This is someone who doesn't have a lot of choices. They're very economically out of power. They don't have the ability to make their lives better. And then they do the best they can with what they've got. And Cinderella stories are really about the fact that someone is still a human being and they're still worthy of love and respect, even if other people have mistreated them. And I can imagine that that's the kind of story that it really resonates with common, ordinary people, because we've all felt that way at some point in our lives. And the idea that, I might be mistreated and overlooked, but I still have value. And maybe when it really counts someday, people will see that. That's a message that I think so many of us would want to hope could come true. So please enjoy Cenerentola by Giambattista Basile. Once upon a time, Prince Vitalo had a daughter who was so dear to him that he always kept one eye on her. The little princess was waited on by a lady who dressed her, taught her fancy needlework, and heaped more affection upon the princess than I can even describe. The prince had married an evil woman who hated the little princess. So you think that that's the wicked stepmother, but just wait, this story gets wild. She would give her stern looks with a twisted expression, and the poor girl complained to her governess, saying, "Oh heavens, I wish you could be my mother, because you are always so kind to me." And the girl said this so many times that the governess at last made a suggestion. "If you want to get rid of that woman, I'll be your new mother, and you'll be as dear to me as my own eyes." She was nearly finished speaking when Zetszola, for that was the name of the princess, said, "Pardon me for interrupting, but I know you love me. Say no more to convince me. Tell me what to do. Write up a contract for us, and I will sign my name to it." "Listen up, then," said the governess. "Be a good girl, and you'll be as happy as you are when you get sweet white bread." I love that expression. Today, it's so easy for us to take things for granted, like food, where, if you think like 300-400 years ago, being able to have sweet white bread with all the fiber removed and stretchy and delicious and soft, that actually would have been a pretty big deal. "Next time your father's away, tell your stepmother that you want an old dress from one of those big heavy chests in the storeroom out back. She loves to see you dressed all in rags and tatters, and will tell you to hold up the lid of the chest while she searches for the ugliest dress. When she's doing this, let the lid fall, and it will break her neck." Okay, so you have the governess explaining to the little princess how to murder her stepmother. Like, That's not in versions of Cinderella that you've heard before, is it? And here's the crazy part. She goes for it. Once she had heard this, every hour seemed like 1,000 years to Zetszola. But at last, she was able to do as her governess had told her. And once the period of mourning for the stepmother was over, the girl began to beg her father to marry her governess. So this is crazy. Not only is little Zetszola yeah, sure, I'll just murder my stepmother. But she goes through the bare minimum. You'd have an official mourning period back then, where you have to wear black and wait so many months before you're allowed to do this and that or remarry or anything like that. But the second the mourning period is over, which would have been regarded as kind of tacky, the little girl's like, hey, you should marry the babysitter. At first, the prince thought his daughter was joking. And, why wouldn't he? A prince wouldn't marry a governess. That would be completely unheard of. But the daughter kept nagging him about it for so long that at last he took Carmesina, for that was the name of the governess, as his wife. And while the newlyweds were rejoicing together, Zetszola looked out from the window and saw a pigeon flying over the wall. The bird spoke to her, saying, "If you ever need anything, send a pigeon to the fairies who live on the island of Sardinia, and you'll get what you need right away." For a few days, the new stepmother was very sweet to Zetszola, offering her the best place at the dinner table, giving her the finest bed to sleep in, and giving her the loveliest clothes to wear. But hardly any time had passed before she completely turned her back on Zetszola. Oh, how shameful it is to be ungrateful. That aside is actually in the story, and I kind of like that. You get a little editorial commentary from the storyteller, oh, my goodness, can you believe this woman? You got this kid to murder a lady so you could replace her, and now you're treating her badly, which, let's just think pure tactics, okay, you've planned a vicious murder. Don't you want to keep your accomplice happy? If you're not actually going to get rid of your accomplice, don't you want to keep the accomplice happy? It just doesn't seem very smart to me to just completely do away with her. Let's check. Oh, no. Oh. I lost my marshmallow. Sad marshmallow. There it is. I don't have any more. The kids ate them all. This is all I'm going to get. I'll live. I'm telling you, it is hard to tell stories and toast a marshmallow at the same time. Maybe one day I'll get the hang of it, but you guys are just going to have to tune in for a whole lot of storytelling. And at this rate, okay, I've ruined 2 out of 3 marshmallows so far. What am I going to do with myself? Anyway, so our editorial, oh, how shameful it is to be ungrateful. And she brought forth 6 daughters of her own, who she had kept hidden until now. She was so pleasing to her new husband and so good at putting her own daughters forward that the prince forgot all about Zetszola. The little princess was taken from her fine rooms and sent to the kitchen. Her gowns of silk and gold were replaced with rags, and her hand no longer held a scepter, but rather turned the handle of the cooking spit in the kitchen. This is back when you'd have the big fireplaces, and there would be a metal spit running across, and you would have someone, usually a boy in medieval kitchens, if this was a great house, whose job was just to stand there all day and keep the rotisserie going so the meat didn't burn. Usually that person would also be given an unlimited quantity of small beer to drink, which, don't get too excited, it would only have enough alcohol, maybe 1 or 2%, to keep it from spoiling, but not enough to intoxicate. But because it was a hot and unpleasant job, you would let that person have as much as they liked. She even lost her name and was now thought of as an animal, being called Ash Girl, or just the cat. And that is how this story is commonly referred to when Italian speakers talk about Cinderella. They'll call her La Gatta Cenerentola. Sorry, I don't speak Italian, so I'm doing my best. I apologize. I know I slaughtered that. And so it happened that the prince had to go to Sardinia on affairs of state, and he asked his 6 stepdaughters, Imperia, Calamita, Scoriella, Diamante, Colomina, and Pascarella, what gifts he could find for them. One wanted lovely clothing, one fabulous hats, another fine face powder, another board games, and so on and so on. And at last, with mocking scorn, he asked his own daughter, "And what do you want?" The ash girl answered, "Nothing, except that you should pass my compliments to the pigeon of the fairies. If you forget to do this, you won't be able to travel, no matter how much money you offer. Remember what I have said. You hold the weapon that may harm or help you." The prince went to Sardinia and bought all of the things his stepdaughters had asked for. But when he boarded his ship to go home, it was unable to leave the harbor because of a terrible storm. At last the ship's captain grew weary from waiting and went to his cabin to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a fairy who said, "Do you know why this ship cannot escape the harbor? Because a prince has broken his promise to his daughter, while he remembered many others who aren't even related to him." These days we don't put so much stock in dreams or omens or things like that, but the audiences who were hearing this story, nearly 400 years ago, would have very much thought of these things as being quite real. When Zetszola tells her father, you had better fulfill this oath that you're making or there's going to be consequences, people would not have taken that lightly. They would have said, "Oh yeah, that definitely can happen." And then also, because he's broken his oath, nature itself is punishing this prince. And so this is a part of the story where you can ascribe it to various sources, magical, divine, the Christian God, maybe not, but just some sort of supernatural force. People absolutely would have taken this part of the story seriously. So the captain awoke and told the prince about his dream. Ashamed of his mistake, the prince went to the grotto where the fairies lived, where he cried out that his daughter sent her compliments and best wishes. Then a beautiful young woman came out of the grotto and thanked the prince for the girl's kindness. In return, the fairies would send a palm tree as a gift to the girl. To help her care for the gift, the fairies also sent a hoe, a golden bucket, and a silken cloth. The prince was astonished, but he took leave of the fairy and returned home. He gave his stepdaughters their lavish gifts, and at last presented the ash girl with what the fairies had sent her. Zetszola accepted her presents with delight. Now this is important. Her sisters had asked for, more trivial things, makeup and dresses, and there's nothing inherently wrong with those things, but they are shallow, they are selfish, and she didn't ask for anything. She just sent kind words and kind wishes and compliments. And so she wasn't expecting anything. So when she got something, she was all the more happy and grateful. And this is very much a reflection of the sort of courtly values that would have been expected in the late Renaissance, that you shouldn't be demanding of those above you because she's appealing to the fairies. They're outranking her. This is the same way that if you went to the court of a duke or a duchess or a king or a queen, your job is to show up and present something to them to show your humility and your obedience and your kindness toward, the lord or lady who outranks you. And then in return, if that person gives you anything, you should show way more gratitude than you would for a gift coming from, an ordinary friend or anything like that. It's all part of this kind of like pecking order of kind of late medieval and Renaissance society, that showing this respectful homage to whoever your lord or lady is. That was very, very important. And so that she is delighted with something as simple as a palm tree when her sisters had demanded far more expensive and exotic gifts. That shows that she has the correct priorities according to the culture that she's living in. Zetszola hoed the soil, watered the palm, and carefully wiped its fronds with the silken cloth. And in 4 days, the tree had grown as tall as a woman. A fairy emerged from the tree saying, "What do you wish for?" To which Zetszola replied that she wanted to be able to leave the house now and then without her sisters knowing about it. That's a pretty good wish in her circumstance. It's also kind of funny, like, I just want to be able to sneak out. Very teenager move, I think. The fairy told her, "Whenever you want to sneak out, come to the tree and say, 'My little date tree, I have tended your soil with a golden hoe. I have watered you with a golden bucket, and I have dried your fronds with a silken cloth. Now undress yourself and adorn me.'" Soon there was a royal ball, and the stepmother and all the daughters were dressed in flowers and lace and perfume and makeup before they flounced off to enjoy themselves. Zetszola dashed to her palm tree, and the fairy came out and dressed her as if she were a queen. Zetszola was placed on top of a fine chair with 2 pages to carry her and ladies to attend her. When Zetszola arrived at the ball, the king was stunned by her beauty. He said to all the courtiers that he had never imagined that such a beautiful woman could even exist. At the end of the evening, he sent a servant to follow the mysterious beauty so that he could discover who she was and where she lived. But the young woman cleverly dropped a handful of coins. The servant stopped to pick them up, giving Zetszola enough time to slip away. She returned to her father's house and returned the beautiful clothes to the fairy. The sisters arrived soon after and ordered Zetszola to make them something to eat while they talked of the amazing things they'd seen at the ball. It's like, you've just been to a royal ball, you haven't had enough to eat, but then, I don't know, I guess that all of us are a bit peckish after we get home from a night of clubbing, so yeah, maybe I'm being a little hard on the stepsisters right there. Meanwhile, the servant went back to the king and confessed with great embarrassment about the coins and how the maiden had managed to escape. This made the king more determined to discover the identity of the maiden, for now he knew that she was clever as well as beautiful. So the king held another ball, and 6 stepsisters were dressed once again in lace and jewels. They left the poor, despised Zetszola sitting by the fireplace. But when the house was empty, she ran to her palm tree. Out came the fairy. Zetszola was splashed with coconut water, done up in curls, combed, brushed, teased, dressed in silk, drowned in necklaces, and soon enough she was as beautiful as the sun. I loved this part, so my knowledge of Italian is not as strong as my other languages, and this is a very old dialect of Italian that I had a hard time with. I actually spent quite a long time trying to figure out this translation, and I hope that I've gotten most of it right. But this part struck me as so funny because it was so descriptive in the things that they do and how modern it sounds. Like, oh, she went to the spa and they splashed her with coconut water and did her hair up in curls and brushed her and just... It sounds so much like a montage scene from a modern day teen movie, where they're making the girl look good for the prom. And I really enjoyed this bit. This version of Cinderella is very funny, and I would love to speak to someone who knows more about these older dialects of Italian to help me with a more proper translation, because I suspect it's even funnier than I think, but just that there's things I'm missing because there's old words that I just don't understand. Then the fairy put her in a carriage driven by 6 mares with grooms and livery pages to attend her. When she arrived at the ball, the 6 stepsisters were awestruck, and a fire was kindled in the king's heart. I really liked that image. That was directly from the Italian, that a fire was kindled in his heart. It's so passionate and exciting. It's a nice phrase. But when the party ended and the mysterious maiden was about to leave, the king sent another servant to follow her. But Zetszola wisely scattered a handful of pearls and jewels. The servant couldn't help but stop to scoop them up, which gave the young woman all the time she needed to escape back to the house and change her clothes. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Oh man, this servant. The servant returned to the king with a very red face. Yeah, no kidding. The king was outraged and said, "Next time, if you don't follow that girl home, I will think of 1,000,000 torments for you." The Italian passage on that was much longer, and it was full of a lot of words I didn't understand, but I got the impression that the king was making some pretty nasty threats. Maybe it's good that I didn't understand all the words, because then I wouldn't have as high of an opinion of the king as I will later in the story. So another ball was announced. The sisters pranced off in their pretty petticoats, and Zetszola went back to the fairy in the palm tree. This time she was dressed more beautifully than ever and arrived in a golden carriage. Now, I ran across a word in the translation here where I thought, is that what that means? I'm not sure, but what I think that I read in the original was that when she went out in this golden carriage and she had all of these attendants and all these people coming with her and in all this splendor, it seemed to say that she looked like a lady of the night out for a walk. I don't know if that's literally what that meant or if I was mistranslating that. I'm not, I don't know. Is that what it meant? And would you want to compare her to that? I'm not sure. It was a very strange passage and it was very puzzling. I'm going to spend more time researching that one. The sisters seethed when they saw the lovely maiden outshine them again. But this time, the king's servant was not fooled by shiny trinkets dropped in his path. So Zetszola ran so quickly that one of her lovely slippers came loose from her foot. She made it to her carriage and cried out, "Get going!" to the coachman. The horses ran with thundering hooves. The servant could not catch the carriage as it flew away, but he took the shoe from the ground and brought it back to the king and told him everything that had happened. I guess this time when the servant goes back to his boss, he can honestly say that he did his job. The king picked up the shoe and said, "If the steps are so beautiful, then how lovely must be the entire house." It's a very nice and architectural metaphor, which I think is very suiting for an Italian story. "Oh, she is as enticing as spices. She is everything I could want in life. Oh, how this love pierces me like a spear. I can only caress this shoe, but not its owner. I cannot see the lovely tree, but only the roots. My life is beauty and tyranny while I look at this shoe, and I cannot see the woman who owns it." Very effusive passage that holds up those stereotypes about Italian lovers, I think. The king commanded his clerks and his trumpeters to make an announcement that every woman on earth should attend a banquet. Every woman on earth. And when the day came, my goodness, what a feast there was. Where did he get so many pastries and servants to make them? How did he even store and serve so many meatballs? I love that it's meatballs. Again, this story's so Italian, it's so fun. I can't even tell you how much macaroni and gravy there was. Macaroni and gravy, I love it. There was so much that you couldn't have eaten it if you had 1,000 lifetimes. So he throws this giant pasta party with macaroni and meatballs and invites literally every woman on earth. All of the women came. The noble and the common, the rich and the poor, the old and the young, the beautiful and the ugly. When they were all assembled, the king went around and tried to put the shoe on each one of them. So he really doesn't care. He's like, look, there is some woman here who I know she's my heart's desire, and I'm going to try every single one of you. It's very non-discriminatory of him, so good for the king. But the shoe would not go onto a single foot in the room, much to the king's despair. So I think this is interesting. This story is written slightly before the Enlightenment. It's the Renaissance, so we still have the beginnings of science and things like that. There is the concept of rationality and all of that, but not quite to the point where rationality and measurement and mathematics would be almost just put on a pedestal a little bit later. In this story, it's not that Cinderella's foot is small and so her shoe is small and everyone else's feet are too big. It's that the shoe will not go on the foot. It's repelling the foot. It doesn't belong. So this is more magical. It has less to do with that this shoe is so dainty and it can be measured properly. It's just that this shoe only belongs to one woman, and it was given under magical circumstances, and so as a magical object, it will refuse to go onto the foot of an unauthorized person. So this is kind of drawing back to that more medieval tradition of magic as opposed to a later Enlightenment tradition of rationality. Because when you get to, again, the Brothers Grimm and the Charles Perrault versions of the story, it's that Cinderella's foot is small, and the stepsister's feet are too big. That's something that can be measured. That's a very Enlightenment way of thinking about this issue, and it's one that would disregard superstition from the Middle Ages, anything to do with magic. In frustration, the king shouted, "Listen up! Some of you will have to do penance because you didn't obey me. If you loved me, you would not have left a single woman of your house behind, no matter how you felt about it." Then the prince confessed, "Sire, I do have one more daughter, but she's just a dirty servant girl who sits at the fireplace. She's too coarse and lowly to be brought into your presence." The king replied, "She's at the top of my list now, and I must see her." And that's a direct translation from the text, that she's at the top of my list. And I love how modern that phrase feels. Even though it's from such a different language and from so long ago, they were still using that expression, like she's at the top of my list now. So the next morning, the prince returned with Zetszola and Carmosina's daughters. As soon as the king saw the young woman, he was pretty sure that he knew who she was. But he was determined to win her properly. So he began to walk toward her with the shoe in hand. But no sooner had he taken one step than the little shoe flew from him and fastened itself on Zetzola's foot as firmly as metal drawn to magnet. I love this part of the story because, again, I was talking before about how, we're after the Renaissance, but we're before the Enlightenment, and we get this awesome combination of these two worlds in this image, where you have the magical aspect. The shoe leaps out of his hand, flies across the room, and binds itself onto Zetzola's foot. So that's the medieval, the magical, the more old way of telling this story. But it mentions metal drawn to magnet, and that is a more modern concept. That's kind of leading into where the Enlightenment's going to take us with these more scientific principles. And it shows how this story is kind of existing in that transition from medieval to modern. And it's also just a beautiful storytelling image. So yeah, it's my favorite part of the story. I really like it. Having seen this, the king took Zetszola in his arms, seated her under the canopy of state, and placed a crown upon her head. The canopy of state is whenever a medieval or Renaissance king or queen was traveling, there would literally be like a sort of tent that would be erected even if you were indoors. And so you'd have the thrones underneath it, and it just kind of symbolizes the power and authority that the royals have over their territory. They obviously wouldn't sit there all the time, but anytime they were conducting official business, they would be seated under the canopy of state, and that would be where they would receive official visitors and do business that had to do with the crown. He ordered everyone to bow to Zetszola and do her reverence, as she was now their queen. As the 6 stepsisters watched all of this, their stomachs turned and their hearts grew sick. They slipped away in disgrace and went back to their mother, where they confessed in disgust that only a crazy person clashes with the stars. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Have you ever heard the Italian version of Cinderella before? If so, how do you think it holds up against the Charles Perrault version that we all know so well? What did you think of the fact that it's funnier? It has the descriptions of food and kind of the petty little emotions that people feel. I don't know. I really like that one. That might actually be my favorite version of Cinderella, but I'd like to know what you think. And if there are any other versions of Cinderella that you want me to read to you by the fire, then please let me know, because Cinderella stories are my absolute favorite kind of fairy tale. I'm sorry I burnt my marshmallow. I'm going to make some plans. I'm going to figure this out. Yeah. Next time, I'm not going to burn my marshmallow. I'm going to get to eat one, and I'm going to get to eat it properly. We can do this. Anyway, thanks for listening.